Hello everyone, I'm Julian Li. I come from the China Institute for Adaptive Studies, University of International Business and Economics, UIBE. As you know, at present, the global economy has entered an era of service economy. The share of service industry of the global GDP is about 70%. As the ratio of the service trade of the global trade is almost 1/4. Now, China is the second largest economy in the world. How about the development of China's service trade? How about the position of China's service trade in the world economy? I think this is a very important issue. Maybe this issue you are very interested in. So I think I'm very lucky. I'm very glad to give you a brief introduction to the development of China's service trade today. My introduction includes 3 parts. In the first part, I will give you a historical review of the development of the service trade of China. From 1982 to 2015, during these 33 years, I have divided the development of the service trade of China into 4 stages. In each stage, I will analyze the characteristics of the service trade of China. In the second part, I will focus on the recent years from 2016 to 2020. During this stage, I will analyze the current situation and the typical features of the service trade of China. I will give you an introduction to the scale, the trade balance, the structure, sector structure, and the market structure, and the regional distributions of the service trade of China. In the third part, I will focus on the policy environment of the service trade of China. I will focus on 2 kinds of policies. The first one is about the innovation development policy, and the second one is about the liberalization and opening up of the policy. And my introduction will be based on the experience comes from the China service trade innovation developed pilots and the China domestic free trade zones. Besides this, I will also analyze the market access commitment and the national treatment commitment that China has made under the framework of the WTO and the free trade agreements signed with China with the foreign economies. Now, let's come to the first part, a historical review of the development of China. I think the first stage is from the 1982 to 1991. During these 10 years, I think after the opening up and reform policy of China, the development of the service trade of China is just at a starting point. So during this stage, the scale of the export and import of the service trade is very low. You can see at this one, as the beginning point of this stage, the export of the service trade is just $2.51 billion. But the growth rate of the export is very higher. And at the ending of this stage, in 1991, the scale of export is almost 7 billion. This volume is almost 3 times of that volume. So we can see that the growth rate of the import and export is very high. But compared with the growth rate of the GDP and the growth rate of the goods trade, we can see that the growth rate of the service trade is much higher than that of the GDP, but the growth rate of the service trade is much lower than that of the goods trade. That means during this stage, the growth of the goods trade is much higher than that of the service trade. Because during this stage, the annual growth rate of the export is almost 20% per year, while the import growth rate is about 12% per year. So the export grows much higher than the import of the services. So during this stage, except in 1984, there is a small deficit in service trade of China. In the other years during this stage, China can maintain in surplus in the service trade. This figure I have given the sector distributions of the service trade of China. From this figure, we can see that the transport, travel, and the other business are top 3 sectors of China, and the sum of the ratio of the transport and the travel services, the sum of these 2 sectors is about 70%. This figure indicates that these traditional sectors still play a very important role in the development of the service trade of China. So let's come to one conclusion about the first stage from 1982 to 1991. The first stage, we can call that stage is the low scale and small surplus stage. Let's come to the second stage. The second stage from 1992 to 1997. In these 6 years, the negotiation of China's accession to WTO to GATT has entered in-depth stage. So China's opening of the service market has been expanded rapidly. So during this stage, the total volume of the service trade has developed rapidly. During this stage, except in this year, 1994, there is a small surplus in the service trade, while in other years, during this stage, the trade in services has been maintained in deficit, and this deficit tendencies has been continued. So let's come to the conclusion of the second stage. From 1992 to 1997, this stage can be called the rapid development but turned into deficit stage. Let's come to the third stage. Third stage is from the 1998 to 2010. During these 13 years, this figure is about the growth rate of the service trade during this stage. We can see that this curve is very, very unstable, ups and downs, and especially in these 2 years, in 1998 and in the 2009, the growth rate of the service trade is negative. Why? Why in these 2 years the growth rate of the service trade was negative? I think maybe that is because of the attack of the 2 financial crises. Except these 2 years, China's service trade development in this stage has developed very rapidly, and the share of China's share in the world trade has continued to increase. In this stage, we can compare with the growth rate of the service trade and with the growth rate of the goods trade. We can see that the growth rate of the service trade is still lower than that of the goods trade. That means during this stage, the goods trade grows much faster than that of the service trade. So we can see that the third stage, 1998 to 2010, this stage can be called the ups and downs and accelerated ahead stage. Let's come to the fourth stage. The fourth stage is from the 2011 to 2015. We can see that during this stage, the growth rate of the service trade is much higher than that of the goods trade. That means during this stage, the service trade of China grew faster than that of the goods trade. This is a distinguished difference of this stage from the other stage. But during this stage, the service trade of China still kept in deficit, and the deficit of the service trade has been further increased during this stage. So we can call this, the first stage is the high growth rate but deficit increased stage. Now let's come to the second part. The second part is about the current station and the typical features of the surface trade of China in the recent years. In this table, I have given you the volume of the import and export and the total surface trade from 2016 to 2019. During these 4 years, you can pay more attention to the last column of this table. We can see that the volume of the surface trade during these 4 years, the volume of surface trade of China has been increased. And the peak value appears in 2018. The total volume of the surface trade of China in 2018 is about $76.9 billion. And now China is the second largest surface trade country in the world. The ratio of the surface trade of China's to China's total trade is about 15%. The ratio of China's surface trade to the global surface trade is about 7%. Now, please pay attention to the volume of the import and the export. We can compare with the import, the volume of the import and export. It is very clear. The import, this volume of the import is much bigger than that of the export during these years, these 4 years. So we can see that the China keeps in deficit in these 4 years, but the deficit of we can compare with deficit of the 2018 to 2019. We can see that the deficit has been decreased during these 2 years. And the tourism, transportation, and the intellectual property use phase are the most important 3 main sources of the deficit of the surface trade of China. This table, I have given you the sector structure of the surface trade of China in 2017. We can compare with the sector structure in 2017 with that in 1991. From this table, we can see that it is the same. The travel, transport, and other business sectors are still the top 3 important sectors of the surface trade of China. But we can see that the sum of the ratio of the travel and transport, the sum of these 2 sectors in sum, this ratio is about 60%, while the sum of the ratio of these 2 sectors in 1991 is about 70%. That means we can compare the ratio of these 2 sectors has been decreased in the recent years. On the one hand, the traditional service sectors, the ratio of the traditional service sectors has been decreased in the recent years. But on the other hand, we can see that the ratio of the new and the emerging service sectors has been increased during these recent years. We see that the computer and information services, the ratio of this sector in 2017 is about 6.2%. And the intellectual property rights usage fee and that of the finance and the culture and entertainment, during these 4 sectors, the ratio of these 4 sectors has been increased in the recent years. This table, I have given you the import and export of 4 subsectors. For these 4 subsectors, including the technical services, transfer fee of research and development achievements, professional management and consulting services, computer and information services. You can compare the export and import of these 4 subsectors. We can see that the volume of the export is much bigger or much larger than that of the import. That means China can maintain the surplus in these 4 subsectors. That indicates that China kept comparative advantage in these 4 new and emerging subsectors. That also indicates that China has a high competitive level in these sectors. Because of the initiative of the One Belt and One Road, the market structure of the surface trade of China has changed in the recent years. Because of the initiative of the OBOR, China has cooperated closely with the countries come from the OBOR, and the cooperation focused on the field in the culture, travel, and technology. The main trading partners from the OBOR, including the Singapore, Thailand, Russia, Malaysia, etc. Let's come to the last point about the regional distributions of China's substrate. We can see that the regional distribution of the substrate is unbalanced. Almost 90% of China's substrate export are concentrated in 11 provinces and cities in the east. And the service trade of the Shanghai, Beijing, and Guangdong all together account for the 65% of the total service trade of China. The eastern regions has obvious comparative advantage in the many fields of the service trade, such as the finance, insurance, transportation, computer and information services, advertising and consulting services. While the cities, the provinces come from the west of China, only have some advantage in some labor-intensive service sector. The third point is about the innovation and the liberalization of the substrate of China. I will analyze the policy environment of the substrate of China from 5 perspectives. The first point I want to point out that China has been continuously promote the development of the substrate innovation pilots. This promotion following 3 steps. In the first step, in February, in 2016, 15 provinces and cities has been established as the substrate innovation pilots of China. These pilots including Shanghai, Tianjin, etc. In the second step, in June of 2018, the construction of these pilots has entered an in-depth stage, and 6 opening up measures were carried out in these regions. In the third step, in August of 2020, the comprehensively deepened pilot program has been initiated, has been carried out, and with a period of 3 years. In the second point, I want to point out that Beijing, the capital of China, has been established as a comprehensive pilot city of the opening up of the service industry of China. And until now, Beijing has gone through 3 rounds of a construction cycle. The main task of Beijing, the main task of this pilot city, including the relaxed market access, improve the government regulation, optimize the market environment, and form some experience on the opening up of the service industry, and this experience can be replicated and popularized in the whole country. The construction of this pilot city has been focused on 6 key areas. These areas including the science and technology, internet and information services, culture and education services, financial services, business and tourism, health and medical. And the most important one is that this pilot city should deepen the reform of the management system of the foreign investment. The third point I want to point out that until now, 21 domestic free trade zones has been established in China. These free trade zones, including the Shanghai, Tianjin, Beijing, Zhejiang, Jiangsu, etc. As the main task of this FT zone, free trade zones, including carrying out the pilot exploration of the expanding, the opening of the service industry. And in this FTZ try to make the market access commitment based on the elective list. And they try to give the national treatment for the foreign service suppliers, the national treatment before admission. And these pilots should deepen the reform of the liberalization, management, and services. And the most important one of the main task, the first one is they should optimize the business environment of China so as to further attract the foreign direct investment in service industry of China. China has entered the WTO in 2001. When China entered the WTO, China has made intensive service commitment in 9 service sectors. The WTO believed that China is the developing country with the largest number of the sector accession. And as of 2007, China's WTO accession and China's opening up commitments has been fully fulfilled. Now, China has concluded the 17 FTA free trade agreements with 25 economies in the world. Under the framework of this FTA free trade agreements, China has made expanded and deepened commitment under these FTAs compared with that under the framework of the WTO. The commitments with the gas plus and the gas actual characteristics, these commitments focus on the transportation, distribution, commerce, and the environment, and other service sectors. That's all. Thank you for your listening. If you have any question, please don't hesitate to contact me. Goodbye.